Here I have the sum of coffee production by country for the years 2010 through 2019. However, this view of the production alone may be too simplistic for an analysis you are trying to conduct. There are features in pivot tables called calculated values that can help you glean deeper insights into your data. Before we try it out, let's drag another production into the values. So we have duplicate columns that both show the sum. Let's say we wanted to understand what percent or what proportion of coffee production each country represents with respect to the other countries. To do this, we right-click on one of the values in the row that we want to change, and we go to Show Values As. This is where all of our preset calculated values live, so take a moment here to pause the video and familiarize yourself with all the options. Welcome back. Since I want to understand what percent each country represents of the total coffee production, I'm going to choose percent of grand total. Now, Excel displays the percentage of coffee production that each country represents with respect to the other countries. Brazil is the highest producer of coffee, with nearly 40% of the total coffee production of these 10 countries. Now that we're working with multiple values fields, let's go ahead and rename this column. To rename a column, simply hover the column header and start typing. I'm going to name it something like percent of total production. Let's drag another production field into the values so we have a third, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see this a little better. This time, let's say that in this column all the way on the right, we wanted to calculate the rank of each country relative to the other countries. We can do this through a calculated value as well. Simply right-click on one of the values in the table, go to Show Values As, and now we can choose rank smallest to largest or largest to smallest. Smallest to largest would rank the smallest producer of coffee number 1 and the largest producer of coffee number 10. Largest to smallest would do the flip, where the largest producer would be number 1 and the smallest producer would be number 10. I'm going to choose the latter, largest to smallest, because I want my largest producer to be number 1. So I click on it, and now this dialog box pops up asking me which base field I want to use. Basically, it's asking which field I want to rank. I want to rank my countries, so this looks good. So I'm going to click OK. And now we can see that Excel has properly ranked Brazil as number 1 and Mexico as number 10. Okay, let's go ahead and move down to the second table I've inserted to the sheet. Now, I just have the total coffee production by year of all 10 of the countries. Let's add another instance of production into the values fields. One of the views that I really like looking at is comparing a year's performance to a base year. And we can do this by right-clicking on one of the values in the column, going to Show Values As, and then choosing Difference From. Now a dialog box pops up, and it needs two inputs, the base field and the base item. Base field represents the field or the variable that you want to compare across, and the base item is the item in the field that you will be using for your calculation of the difference. Since we're doing calculations from the base year of 2010, this looks good to me, so I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. Okay, let's look at these numbers real quick. The first row does not contain a value, and this makes sense because subtracting 2010 from 2010 would give you 0. But when we jump to 2011, we see that the value is negative 22. Since 7173 is the total production number for 2011, which is 22 less than 2010's production number of 7195. Looking at 2012, we see that the number is 649 because the 2012 production number, 7884, is 649 more than the base year of 2010. This means that 2013 is 898 higher, 2014 is 736 higher, and so on and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and label this column as difference from 2010 in millions of kilograms. Great. One of the other views that we might also find helpful is looking at the year-over-year difference, meaning the difference between two adjacent years, instead of the difference between a year and the base year of 2010. Remember, the year-over-year difference refers to the growth or decline of a given metric between 2 years. Year-over-year numbers are often used in industry to understand a company's health and performance. To do this, let's go ahead and add another production field into our values. To calculate the year-over-year difference in a pivot table in Excel, simply right-click on one of the values in the column that you want to change, go to Show Values As, go to Difference From, and once again, we see this dialog of base field and base item. We're going to keep the base field the same because we're comparing across dates. But this time, we're going to change the base item to previous. This is because we want to calculate the difference from the previous year, which will give us definitionally the year-over-year change. So I'm going to click Previous and click OK. And now these numbers represent the change from each year. For example, -22 is the difference between 2010 and 2011, which is 7195 and 7173. 671 represents the difference between 2011 and 2012, because that's the difference between 7173 and 7844. Let's quickly name our new column, Year-over-year change in millions of kilograms. I personally really like the year-over-year view because it makes it extremely easy to see overall trends. For example, in the 2018-2019 year, we can see that there was a massive drop in coffee production worldwide. What happened here? Actually, with a quick Google search, I was able to find that there was a massive drop in the price of coffee due to a big surplus of stored Brazilian coffee between those 2 years, driving many small-scale farmers out of business and decreasing worldwide production. This is a really good example of a quick insight that we could glean from a pivot table. Okay, let's go down to the final table in our lecture. Here we have a collapsed table that has the country as the first row, and we can press the plus sign and we see that years is the nested row here. For our example, let's once again go ahead and drag production as another value. With calculated fields, we're not only able to calculate values based on the first level of data, which is in this case, the total production in millions of kilograms per year, but also the sub-rows and groupings. With Brazil expanded, we can right-click on one of the values, go to Show Values As. I'm going to choose percent of grand total. As we discussed earlier, of these 10 countries, Brazil did 40% of the grand total of production, and then each one of these rows represents what percentage of the grand total of production that each year in that country represented. However, I may just want to see the percentage of production that each year represents within each country. To do this, let's add another production values field and zoom out so we can see our table a little bit better. This time I'm going to right-click, go Show Values As, and this time I'm going to choose percentage of parent row total. When I click it, Excel does something slightly differently this time. Excel recognizes the parent row of all of these values to be Brazil. So each year is represented as a percent of Brazil's total coffee production. Let's go ahead and rename this column percentage of parent row. Now, if we collapse the fields once again, you might notice something strange. The totals displayed here are exactly the same for both grand total and percentage of parent row. This is because the parent row of all of these countries is the grand total. So they're giving you the same thing because they're calculating off of the basis of their parent row, which are ultimately the same.